Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Uh, I'm going to start now, and I hope you all are all tuned in to the ISL Zoom platform. Welcome to the B paper lecture on the ISL Code of Ethics. Uh, this has become a regular feature of mine, and I hope that all of you who are here or follow this are people who are doing it for the first time. And I don't like to have people who repeating this particular subject. But in case you have been unfortunate and you have to repeat it, well, I hope you are successful this time. Now, as you know, the B paper contains two parts, the first part and the second part. And the first part, part A or whatever it may be called, has two questions. Both may be based on the code of ethics or may be based on profession, the ISL procedures or the objectives or the ISL Act. So basically, the first two questions are on the first question. Out of those two questions, one, it is compulsory that you answer one. Sometimes, I think last couple of years or last couple time, I think at the time before that, we said two questions from the Code of Ethics. Sometimes we said one from the Code of Ethics and one from some other area involving the ISL operations or the establishment of the ISL. Or the engineering council or something regarding the profession. And then the balance questions that you have, which about or which you have to only answer 3 out of about 10 that option that you have, which is really a superb range of spread of questions you get. You have to answer any 3 questions. Those are generally related to give you enough flexibility to choose something that you know. Some area, whether it be highways or power generation and distribution or water supply and drainage or environment or whatever it is, or the economic state of the country, education, whatever it is, you have like something like 10 questions and you have to only answer pick any 3. So you out of the 12 questions that are presented to you, you have to answer one from the first part and 3 other questions from the whole range basket of questions that you get from the other areas. So I'm going to talk about ethics. And what I'm going to talk is about ethics, very brief introduction to ethics. Engineering institution, we look at some of the codes of ethics of other engineering institutions, well-known engineering institutions. The ISL code of ethics, then a very short professional conduct, because that is very important. Actually, the whole purpose of the code of ethics is to ensure that we, as the engineers, you act in a correct way and you conduct yourself in a very professional and ethical way, ensuring that you look after the well-being of the country, the profession, the community, and all that. And then what's the point of having a code of ethics or having any, if you can't have a disciplinary procedure to find, to correct somebody who does something wrong. If we are not in a position to send you to jail if you do anything or you violate the code of ethics, but basically what we really try to do is to try to correct you and point out your error, and so that you do not repeat that type of mistake in the future. So unfortunately, I can't talk to any of you all and I can't get a response because you see, what is ethics? And that's a question I put to the my audience at the auditorium. See what they have to say. How do they understand what is ethics? But what is ethics? And ethics, very simply, is the discipline dealing with what is good and bad, and with moral duty and obligation. Now, all of us have the power to may judge and make and discern between right and wrong. But as you see in this little cartoon, this little picture here, we have a little devil inside our brain, and we have a little angel also. And these two are in constant conflict. You see, though they're smiling and grinning at each other, the angel is saying, look, why don't you do it this way? This is a fun way of doing it. You know, it's a naughty way, but it's okay. Whereas the angel is saying, no, no, you don't do it that way. You do it the correct way. You follow the rules and regulations. You don't break rules. So it is up to us as mature persons to decide on the correct way of doing things. Basically, you disregard what the devil tells you and try to do what your little angel tells you. So another definition of ethics really is going to a more professional level is it's moral judgment. You see, that's where we make our decision and we are bound by various moral rules. And that gives rise to an ethical system. And the foundation of it is a code of ethics. So once you have your ideas, as individuals, we don't have codes of ethics. But we have moral judgment. We know what is right and wrong. And then we have some moral rules that help us to order our lives and do what we consider to be correct. Now, as individuals in our lives, we don't go into ethical system, but when you are an organization, when you are a company or when you are an institution, then you have to have a more formal system. And that is where the ethical system comes in play, and that gives rise to a code of ethics. By the way, if you have any doubts, I don't know whether we can't talk, but you can put your questions into the chat if you have any clarification. And maybe later on or at the end of the program, if you have some time, we will try and go over these and see how we can respond, how best I can respond. Then again, another definition would be a value structure. You see, we have values, core values. We want to be, like for example, as we want to become engineers, we want to be good engineers, right? We want to pass our exams well. We want to achieve a position in particular position in society, right? And these things, these core values give rise to a vision, because the vision is what we want to be, what we hope to be. And that on that we develop a mission which tells you how we are going to get there. And with that is linked to integrity, which is honesty, trust, quality, ethics, and all these things. So basically, all of us have core values. And to be to go a bit further, uh, values are something really we get from our infancy, from our childhood. Because the first time we are introduced and exposed to values is when our parents correct us and tell us, look, this is the right thing to do. Don't do this. Don't be naughty. Don't eat all your dinner. Don't throw your food around. You know, and to act correctly, right? Don't tell lies. And then we go to school, and there we are given a slightly more formal interpretation of right and wrong. And then most of us in Sri Lanka, at least even in the childhood, we are exposed to religious principles, and we will be sent to a Dham Pasala or a Sunday school or the equivalent of a Hindu or Muslim or Islam organization where the child is given a grounding in good religious practices. And religion, a lot of it links up with ethics. Well, no religion tells you to do the wrong thing. It always tells you to do the right thing, the correct thing. So basically, you have by the time you really are out of school, by the time you finish your or you're halfway through your secondary education, you have a reasonably good idea of what's right and what is wrong, what you should do correctly and what you shouldn't do correctly, what the goals are, what you want to do. You want to pass a O level, you want to pass a A level, you want to go to the engineering faculty or the medical faculty or do law or whatever it is, or you want to be a fashion designer. I mean, nowadays the options are tremendous compared to what it was when we were studying. So there are so many ways open to you. Now, getting back to this issue of code of ethics, which is really what a lot of institutions have and organizations. Why do we want to have a code of ethics? A lot of it is very practical. Because the code of ethics defines accepted and acceptable behavior. It tells you how you should behave and behave correctly, accepted behavior, acceptable. What society would accept and expect from you. It promotes a high standard of practice because, especially as engineers, we are. You will see that when you go into the code of ethics of organized engineering institutions, the welfare of the society or the public is paramount. That is the most important thing. And we can't take shortcuts and do shoddy work. If we want to look after and safeguard the community, we have to maintain high standards of good ethical standards of our engineering practice. It provides a benchmark for members to use for evaluation. Now, this is when for example, if we are in the course of our work, like when you're working, when you're in the industry, right? You find up a situation comes up. A lot of you may be already experiencing this type of situation. You're faced with a problem, and the code of ethics generally will give you a guidance as to how best you can overcome this issue. So you can evaluate self-evaluation, what you have done, what you need to do. Because quite often you will find that you are faced with a dilemma. That is, there will be maybe 2 or 3 options to your project. Rajini, Shivani, sorry. So it gives you a guidance as to how you should evaluate and work towards getting over problems or issues that you might face. It helps to establish a framework for professional behavior and responsibilities, because when you, as an engineer, you are expected to behave in a very professional manner. You are expected to take on the responsibilities that come with your profession. And as a chartered engineer, you are responsible for doing things the right way, doing things correctly, and ensuring that the health, safety, and welfare of the community, of people, is not violated in any way. I'm taking these two as a vehicle of occupational identity and a mark of occupational maturity. It means that basically, you see, when you are a new institution, you don't have, but as you grow, now so the ISL, which started in 1906, is now what, almost 120 or a little more than about 115 years old. But the code of ethics that it developed maybe is about 20 years old, 25 or thereabout, or 30 years old, right? Hello. And yeah, and therefore it makes people realize that you are a mature organization, that you can be trusted and relied on to act in a correct way. So your occupational identity, you as an engineer, you are identified as a person who can do things correctly and do it honestly, and you are mature enough to act in the correct way and do things in the best interest of the community and society. Now, so much for the little introduction. Now let's look at some of the engineering codes of ethics, or some places called the code of conduct of some of the leading engineering institutions internationally. And if you were to, I've just taken four, but if you were to look at every of the engineering institutions, you go to the web and look at Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, America, Japan, Korea, India, whatever it is, Russia, you will find that all of them have very similar uh, focus on on the behavior and the expectations of the engineer. Now, the first one I'm going to take is the engineering, is the European Federation of National Engineering Associations. Now, this is really an umbrella body in Europe. During when the European Union was formed, they formed this, where they provide very general guidelines which can be adapted by each of the countries in the European Union for their code of ethics. So, the members of the European Union, the UK and France and Germany and all these people, they base their code of ethics on the very broad outlines given by FIANI. Then there is the American, the issue of electrical and electronics engineers, IEEE, which I think most of you are familiar with, because it's something there's a strong student chapter in the university, and the IEEE is quite active in the country. Then there's the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is one of the leading American engineering institutions, American Society of Civil Engineers, and the Institute of Civil Engineers UK, ICE, again, which has a local chapter, and some of you, most of you, may be members of the ICE Sri Lanka chapter. So if we look at FIANI, now FIANI, the fundamental concept of FIANI is that the decision and actions of engineers have a large impact on the environment and on society. So the engineering profession thus has an obligation to ensure that it works in the public interest and with regards to health, safety, and sustainability. So basically, what they're focusing on here, what they're stressing is that all the work or most of the work that engineers do has an impact on society and the environment. I would really put impact on this, on society and the environment, but they have put environment and society. Anyhow, whatever it is, both are very important, and those are the two key areas that engineers are expected to maintain: regard for society and a regard for safeguarding the environment. So therefore, the engineers have an obligation to ensure that all you do, all your work, is in the public interest and with regards to the health, safety, and sustainability of your of the community, of the people, of your country, right? Of the world. You can see a lot of the problems that are being faced by us today in global warming is a result of our disregard for the environment. In our rush to, but because with our rush for industrialization starting in the 19th century, right? We just threw all sorts of emissions into the air. We put all sorts of pollution, discharge various pollutants into the waterways. And all these things have now contributed to a polluted globe. So it is now our duty as engineers, when we do anything, to make sure that we do not cause any further damage to the environment and to society. So because of this, based on these major two premises, the FIANI Code of Conduct has the following clauses. Individual engineers have a personal obligation to act with integrity in the public interest, act honestly in the public interest, and to exercise all reasonable skill and care in carrying out their work. Right? Firstly, you shall maintain your relevant competences at a necessary level and only undertake tasks for which you are competent. if you are competent as a structural engineer, you may be a civil engineer, but your competency is in structural engineering. You only exercise your abilities in that particular area, and you don't go and start designing waterways or irrigation systems which you don't have that much of a knowledge about. You similarly don't go and poke your nose into electrical distribution and transmission because you know nothing about it. So you stick with what your specialty is, what your competencies, and what your area of expertise is. They shall not misrepresent their educational qualifications or titles. So you don't go and say that if you are, I mean, this is quite obvious. If you got a BSc engineering, don't go and say you got a MSc. If you got a first class or you got a second upper, don't go and say you got a first class. So don't misrepresent your educational qualification or your experience for that matter, because these are things that can be easily found out now. And if they are found out, and generally if you apply for a job and any company will do a due diligence and try to find out more about you, and then they find that you have conned to them, if you lied to them, it's going to ruin your chances of getting the job. So don't ever misrepresent your qualifications or titles. Shall provide impartial analysis and judgment to employers or clients and avoid conflicts of interest, and observe proper duties towards of confidentiality. So basically, most of you, as you go along, will become as a senior engineer. You will be entrusted with as a manager of a project or as the project director or whatever it is, and you have to be very impartial in your analysis of situation and the judgment you make. Now, quite often, if you are acting as the engineers, for example, on a project, you're hired by the client, but you're also dealing with the contractor. And sometimes the contractor, okay, he may try to make claims that are not justified, but sometimes there may be justification in what he says. For example, if for rain, for bad weather, he can only work, he'll either say 5 days in the week. He can ask for an additional 5 days to compensate for that, for him to do the job. But if you were to ask for 7 days or 10 days, then you have to analyze, you can see the charts are there, the way the charts are there. You can then decide and tell him, look, I will, don't try to con me. I know exactly that there were 5 days that you couldn't work. So I'll give you 5 days extra, but nothing more. And you jolly well finish your work in those 5 days. Similarly, conflict, we'll come to this again when we come to ISL automatic. I'll just run through this fairly fast. Shall carry out their tasks also to prevent avoidable danger to health and safety, and provide and prevent avoidable adverse impacts on the environment. Now, again, here you have to safeguard the environment. You make sure that you don't put out pollutants into the atmosphere or into the waterways. You don't uh, jeopardize the workforce or the neighborhood or the people in the area with by doing things that will be cause harm to them. Right? So there are lots. If you go and read up for example, the Bhopal gas leak incident that took place in India, a Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, there are a lot of things that they could have done to prevent this, but they neglected the plant, and there is a classic breakdown of all ethical principles because they were only interested in money, in making profits, and they neglected the maintenance of the plant and ended up by killing over 1,000 or 2,000 people, and also injuring and damaging the lives of many, many more. You shall take responsibility for your work and for what is done under your supervision. Don't pass the buck. If you do something and there is a problem, accept responsibility and come up with a solution for that. See how you can get over it. Don't try to pass the buck and blame it on your subordinates or somebody else. Right? Be respectful of people you work with. Now, as you know, we are all living in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multidisciplinary society, right? Don't look down on anybody. You accept everybody at for what they are worth. Yeah, you may have a good engineer who is of another ethnic group, order. You accept it. It doesn't matter what religion or ethnicity or what your beliefs are or what your sexual orientation or whatever it is. But if you do the job well, right, that's it. And you accept that person. You don't disregard or you don't look down on that person. If he's a disabled person, yes, if he can do the work, you accept him. There is no question, no discrimination. There is no discrimination. The word discrimination should not come into your vocabulary. And you should be ready to contribute to public debate on matters of technical understanding in areas that you are competent of. Now, quite often there are issues like, for example, the port city, Umaue, and there are people who know subject who will talk about it. But there are also a lot of people who don't know very much about it, but who will write long, who are very good at writing long letters and so you only talk and you contribute to public debate if you are competent to make an assessment of that situation and make a valuable contribution to solving the problem. This one says that these codes are applicable to all the other pan-European statement. Legal that means all European countries generally should follow this, and this is linked to the codes issued by the National Engineering Association. Now let's look at the issue of civil engineers. Now here their first clause is that they should discharge their professional duties with integrity and shall behave with integrity in relation to all conduct bearing upon the standing, reputation, and dignity of the institution and of the profession of civil engineering. So you don't do anything that will cast a black mark, that will besmirch the, the name of the institution or the profession of the engineering profession. And whether it is civil or electrical, mechanical, chemical, or whatever it is, you do not do anything that will make the public think bad of the engineering profession. All members shall only undertake work in that they are competent to do. This was also there in the PNE. All members shall have full regard for the public interest, especially in matters related to health and safety, and in the relation to the well-being of future generations, that is sustainability. And they go on further to stress the fact that sustainability, all members shall show due regard for the environment and for the sustainable management of natural resources. So the sustainability environment is a very, very important part in the engineer's line of duty, line of service, right? You've got to make sure that you do not do anything to damage or spoil or ruin the environment. The environment has suffered, the world has suffered long enough because of our disregard, mainly because of engineers. So you have to now be particularly careful to avoid anything that will cause harm to the environment. All members shall develop their knowledge, professional knowledge, skills, and competence on a continuing basis. Yes, you come out of the university with a basket of knowledge. And if you think that that is enough for you for the rest of your life, good luck to you. You're not going to go very far. Because engineering is not a dead science. It's not a static science. It's a science that is always developing. It's always increasing. You can see, I mean, especially in areas of electronics, telecommunication, computers, IT, even in areas of civil engineering, mechanical. Mechanical, when we were studying, was basically mechanical, links and chain drives and belt drives and gearboxes and things like that. Now we are talking of mechatronics and various other variable speed drives, not mechanical, but electrically and electronically controlled. So there is a total change. And unless you keep abreast with the current trends in the in the technology, you are going to be lost. And also, you should give all reasonable assistance to further the education, training, and continuing CPD of others. That's basically your subordinates and all those who are working with you. You have to look at the main things here. You develop your knowledge. You keep abreast with current trends and improve your knowledge, and also help your subordinates to develop and upgrade their level of knowledge. And this is not only knowledge, but even when it comes to when they say once you get your charter, you most probably some of your superiors would have helped you. You help your subordinates also who work for the charter and get their professional qualification. And this one is of course something that is only here in the IC. All members shall, in the event of being convicted of a criminal offense, notify the institution upon, so if you're charged in court for some criminal offense, not for a traffic offense, but if you go and kill somebody or set fire to someone's house or do something like that, a criminal offense, you have to inform the institution. If you become bankrupt or disqualified as a company director because of some malpractice, you have to inform the institution. And in the event of you find that one of your friends or somebody known to you has violated the code of ethics or the code of professional conduct, you inform the institution. So you have this is something found only in the IC code, but it is something that is quite relevant. Actually, C is there in most of the others, but A and B are something that is not so because they take for granted that if you are convicted, you will be removed from by the institution for violation of the code of ethics or whatever reason. Now let's look at the IEEE. Now the IEEE, that we the members of the IEEE in recognition of the importance of our technologies in affecting the quality of life. Now IEEE, which is electrical and electronics engineers, they have a big, all their equipped, their gadgetry, their inventions, everything has a strong impact on human, on our well-being, on the way we throughout the world, and in accepting a professional obligation to our profession and to the community we serve. So basically, we have to make sure that we are a personal obligation to do the right thing for the profession and look after the communities and issue we serve by maintaining a very high degree of ethical and the highest ethical and professional conduct, and agree to accept responsibility in making decisions that we don't pass the buck, like I said earlier. We avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest wherever possible, and to make it known to our employers if there's such a thing were to crop up. Be honest and realistic in stating claims or estimates based on available data. Yes, sometimes we jack up our prices because we think that we can get the contract at a totally inflated price because there is somebody working in our interest to get it. Or we go very low thinking that we can undercut all the others. Either way is bad because if you go low, you're not going to, you might get the job, but you won't be able to deliver the requirements because you can't afford, you won't have the funds to do it because your quota is so low. So you have to be realistic in and honest when you make claims or estimates. Reject bribery in all its forms. And understand, you have a good understanding of the technology you're using. It's appropriate application, okay, how we're going to use it, and potential consequences. You see, especially with a lot of the new technologies, the emerging technologies as we call them, there are possibilities that, there are certain things that are not fully solved and they can be harmful. So you have to know the potential consequences in using new technology. But just to give a very simple example, driverless cars are now becoming okay. The becoming sort of a lot of people are talking of using driverless vehicles. But the driverless vehicle still, there is a problem as how it decides on appropriate action. Now, for example, if you are going in a driverless car, there are 3 or 4 of you in the car, and you're on a narrow road with a embankment on a big drop on one side and a rock face on the other side. And suddenly a child runs across the road. How does the car react? If there's adequate space and distance, the car will brake. But if there isn't, it may either swerve to the left and crash into the rock wall and most probably seriously injure the people in the vehicle, or it will swerve to the right or left and go off the embankment and crash down 200 feet down and kill everybody and also burst into flames. Or does he go straight and kill the child, but save the people? Now, the car can't think that far. It cannot. So there is this dilemma that you're faced with with the new technology. How do you get to a situation like this? Then you shall maintain and improve your technical competence. And you only undertake tasks only if you're qualified by training and experience or after full disclosure of the relevant limitations. So, like I said, if you are technically competent and you are a structural engineer and you have to you take on the design of a multi-story, say a 20-story building, but your competence is only up to say 12 stories. Then, although you say you can claim that you're a multi-story building designer, you can't undertake that job because you can't go 20-story building. You are not competent to do it. So you have to tell your client, look, I mean, your client might come to you because maybe you're known to somebody or you're recommended by somebody for whom you have done a 12-story building. I say, look, technically, I should not undertake this because this is not my area of competence. But I will recommend you can give him 1 or 2 other names of your colleagues or friends who can do this level of work. And because you have to be honest and be ensure that, because you go and you don't know exactly what's involved in the design of a 20-story building, but end up with the building worst case scenario of crashing down and killing everybody or that getting everybody in it. And so you have to be careful of that. Then also seek and accept offer honest criticism of technical works and acknowledge and correct errors. Uh, uh, Ladies and gentlemen, I got to stop this for a few minutes. Hi. I'm relocating because we're having some visitors. Hi. Yeah. No. I'll go to the room. No. Ah, okay, sure. Bye. Okay. My part of the family and grandkids turned up and now they're going off there. Okay, so let's continue. We can accept and offer honest criticism of technical works and to acknowledge and correct errors and give credit to others who really do a good job. Quite often we like to take all the the credit for ourselves. All the applause is for us, but we don't want to acknowledge other people's the work that other people do. So be honest, and if somebody criticizes what you do, and if it is good criticism, something that will help you to improve and develop your design or your work, accept it and work with that person to upgrade your work. Again, this is a question of discriminate. You treat fairly all persons, regardless of race, religion, gender, disability, or age, or national origin, or whatever. The best you treat a person for what he is, a human being, right? And with and if he has the required knowledge that you require for your job, yes. Avoid injuring others, their property or reputation, or employed by false or malicious action. This is something that we Sri Lankans are pretty good at. If we don't get a particular job, if we try and or if we don't get what we want, we will start putting out Kalapatra. Now social media is a deadly weapon that people use and can you know injure the reputation and spread all sorts of false information about mix of these of people. So don't spread false or malicious information about anybody. And assist colleagues and co-workers in their professional development and support them in following this code of ethics. So once again, it's a question of helping your colleagues to develop themselves, the CPD. You should also develop yourself. That where you help you're developing yourself is in the earlier one, the first clause here. You maintain and improve your technical competence. Thank you. Whereas here we say you also help your colleagues and those working under you to develop their technical competence. And also helping them to follow the code of ethics. Now let's look at the next one, the last of the examples we look at, the American Society of Civil Engineers. Again here, we are talking of using our knowledge and skill for the enhancement of human welfare. Being honest and impartial, serving with fidelity, that is with honesty, increase your competence, and supporting the professional and technical societies of a discipline. That's the ISL user that to say you should support the ISL or you. So the fundamental clauses are engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Basically, you look after and you work in the interest of the public. The people matter. Engineers shall perform services only in areas of their competence. So we have this has been this is echoing in all that we have been going over the past other 2 or 3 that we looked at, right? Engineers shall issue public statements only in a subjective and truthful manner. Engineers shall act in professional matters for each employee as faithful agents and shall avoid conflicts of interest. I'll tell you what the conflict of interest is later when we come to that. Engineers shall build a reputation on merit of their services. And shall you don't go running after bigwigs to rise up in your profession. You perform well, and people will appreciate it, and then you earn your reputation on your merit, not because your uncle is the minister or somebody else is your father knows chairman. And you don't compete unfairly with others by again undercutting them and making it difficult. Uphold the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession. You don't, when the IC has that, you don't say anything that is going to damage the reputation of the engineering profession. And engineers should continue their professional development, CPD, throughout your career, and shall provide opportunities for the professional development of those engineers under their superiors. So this you can see how important it is for you to improve your knowledge and also guide and support and build up the knowledge that in your subordinates and those who are working under you. You don't treat them like slaves or like some subhuman people. They are also qualified people. They have also come up to most of the people with a basic degree or with a NDT or some qualification which will enable them to go further. So you have to support and help them in developing their competence in their particular field of engineering or even in any other field, because you may be working with a team of environmentalists, sociologists, accountants, and you help those sorts of junior under you, even draftsmen or CAD operators. You can give them more advanced training so that they become more specialized in their field. So if we look at the IESL code of ethics, now we come into the IESL code of ethics, which is really the thing that we are going to be tested on. Engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Proper utilization of funds is performance of the professional duties, and it shall take precedence over the responsibility of the person, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now, all this is echoed in all four that we looked at: FIANI, ICE, Civil Engineers, American Society of Civil Engineers, and IEEE. Shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And they have also added the proper utilization of funds in performing a duty. So you can see how important it is. And the most important thing for the engineer is to work in the interest of humanity, work in the interest of the people of that country, of that society. The second clause says engineers shall always act in a manner to uphold and enhance the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession while safeguarding public interest at all times. So basically, again here, the Medical Society of Civil Engineers and the UK Society of Civil Institute of Civil Engineers also echo the same sentiment. Uphold the honor and dignity, integrity and dignity of the engineering profession. Sustainability, environment. Engineers shall be committed to the needs of sustainable management of the planet's resources and seek to minimize adverse environmental impacts of the engineering works. Right? Again, this is echoed in all four that we looked at. So these are the very important out of all the uh, clauses. These are the the predominant clauses, right? People, and now the environment. Engineers shall build their reputation on merit and shall not compete unfairly. This is again in the American Society of Civil Engineers. Shall perform professional service only in areas of their competence. This is again echoed by all four, right? PNE, Civil Engineers UK, Civil Engineers America, and the IEEE. Engineers shall apply their skills and knowledge in the interest of the employee. This is again FIANI and IEEE. Engineers shall talk you evidence and express opinions in a truthful manner, again FIANI and IEEE. And engineers shall continue their professional development throughout their career and shall advance and shall encourage engineers under them to advance their knowledge and experience. Again, this is echoed in all four that we looked at. So, and if you look at if you go and look at the other codes of ethics and codes of conducts in the other institutions globally, you will find that these four are virtually echoed in every one of them. That is, work in the public interest, safeguard the environment, only work in areas of your competence, and develop yourself and encourage your subordinates also to advance their knowledge. So these four are the most critical of the clauses in any of these engineering codes of ethics. So now that we had a look at the international scene and look at the international flavor of things, let's look at the ISL code of ethics. ISL code of ethics. How many of you, I hope you all have read the ISL code of ethics. It's there on the web. You should have gone in and read through this, get an idea of what is involved. Rather, it will be like double Dutch to you. So the ISL code of ethics has 8 clauses. And the first clause says that engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public and proper utilization of funds and other resources in the performance of their duties. And it shall take precedence over their responsibility to the profession, sectional, blah, 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 and all this sort of thing, right? So basically, you have to look after the, the safety, health, and welfare of the public and utilize the monies entrusted to you, especially if you are working on large development projects, sometimes they may be donor funded on loans, and it is your responsibility to ensure that the money is used correctly and for the right purpose. So now the ISL, unfortunately, the clauses don't end there. Each clause has a number of sub clauses. And the first thing that they say is that sub clause 1 is that you should be objective and truthful in your professional reports. So all, we have to make a statement. Right? So you don't lie, you don't cook facts. You have to say something, say it honestly. Because remember that quite often it can come to situations where some of these issues may end up in a court of law. And if you have made false statements, you can get into really bad trouble. Always be truthful. You don't know, better to say you don't know and you will find out and come back and report back with the correct facts than making ad hoc statements, off the back of your mind, which are incorrect. So remember that the truth is extremely important. You should always ensure that public services are maintained. Engineering service is essential to the public welfare. Now, to give you an example of something that happened in the mid 1990s, somewhere around 95 or 96, Ceylon Electricity Board, on some issue of salaries and vehicle permits and whatever it is, some relatively petty issues, went on strike. Now, when the CEB goes on strike, the whole of the power supply, the power generation, distribution, and transmission and distribution comes to a grinding halt. And for 3 or 4 days, the country was without power. Industry stopped, hospitals. They said that the hospitals, that they would maintain the generators in hospitals. That never happened because the workers all vanished. And the whole country was crippled. And that was a absolutely incorrect thing that was done by the CEB engineering unions, where they crippled the country because of their selfish needs. Fortunately, we have not had another disaster like that because the country cannot. Say the water board, for example, were to go on strike, it would be a major issue, right? There are other services sometimes are not that critical; they can be managed. But say there are these essential services which the port goes on strike, for example. Port engineers and the port go on strike. Everything comes, our imports, our exports, everything comes to a grinding halt, and the country is crippled. So you don't do anything that will disrupt engineering services essential to public welfare. transport services. Now, fortunately, there are the private bus service. Those days, it was only the state-owned bus services. Because the state nationalized the private sector services in Mr. Vandanak's time. And when they went on strike, the whole country's transport system came to a grinding halt. They had to put the armed forces to drive the buses and act as conductors. So you don't do anything that will make trouble for people. You work to recognize engineering standards. Because if you were to deviate, engineering standards, a lot of our design work revolves around engineering standards. Engineering standards are developed and are there. Say, for example, you have the British standards, the Sri Lanka standards, the DIN standards, the Japanese standards, the Euro standards, whatever it is, they ensure a safe design. If you were to take shortcuts and work around those standards, you will end up by most probably building something that is not safe. You see, a lot of the engineering standards have a factor of safety written into them. Yeah. So when the factor of safety allows for any unforeseen situations, say loading or wind forces or whatever it is, that could happen. Now, if you were to ignore those and just go because you want to save money rather than putting uh, so much of steel reinforcements, you want to cut that down and save money by reducing that quantity. You're risking the lives of the people who are going to use that building. So you don't violate the standards, the engineering standards that are established for any particular engineering activity. You do not participate in assignments that would create a conflict of interest between the engineers and the public, and you can advise your client of these issues. For example, here, if your client wants to put up a factory in a rural area, fine. So he's able to provide employment to these people and all that type of thing. That's good. But if the effluent from that, if his process has uh, liquid effluents, that contaminants that could contaminate the waterways, and he says, okay, we'll just put it into that stream that is flowing by the side, that is wrong. Because then you're damaging the environment. And that stream is used by people to bathe, for animals come and drink water from it. There is used for agricultural purposes. So you have to tell him that this is not the way to do it. And you have to convince him that he has to put in a proper treatment plant to ensure that the water, the effluent, the liquid discharges are purified to a point where they are at acceptable levels before they are put into the public waterways. Sometime years ago, in working in the project for the cleaner production in Ratpala, we went there. We found that all the drains. If you go on Monday, the drains, the water, the drains all yellow. You go there 2 days later, the thing is pink. Why? There is a factory that dyes. Dye means coloring. DYE, dyeing the fabric, the white fabric that you bought, the raw fabric, dye it to the colors required by various plants. And the effluent, from the water, they use a lot of water, and that water from after the dyeing, some of the water just discharged into the drains, and that goes into the waterways. And some of it seeps into the groundwater, and people were having green wells and pink wells and yellow water wells. The major problem. So we had to be very strict, threatening these people with legal action, and they quickly put in a treatment plant and ensure that the discharges from their from their plant were acceptable. Similarly, with gaseous emission, your exhaust gases from your boilers or your generator, diesel plants, whatever, must have the conformity with accepted standards without causing any air pollution. If your judgment is being overruled in matters of pertaining to the health welfare of the community, like for example, if you are like this plant that I was telling you about, if you're going to you tell the person don't build the plant there because unless you have a proper treatment system, and your employer says no, that's too expensive, I just can't do it, then it is your duty as a professional to inform the relevant authorities, say the environment authority or the municipality or somebody, there will be national bodies, that this person is putting up this plant here. There will be this effluents that have been discharged and which will contaminate the waterway. And I have informed him that he must do it, but he's persisting in doing it, and therefore please take action to ensure that he complies with the requirements of a proper treatment plant to ensure that clean effluents go into the water. So your responsibility as an engineer, even if you're not chartered, you are responsible for maintaining the health, welfare, and the safety of the community. You don't want them poisoned by the muck that's going into the waterways. Then contribute to public discussion, but you advise people and you talk on areas that you know of, only in matters of your competence. Especially if you feel that by what you're saying will be beneficial to the community. There are a number of clauses, sub-clauses here. Whistleblowing. You know what whistleblowing is? If you know of any violation, I think in one of the other, I think was it the IC clauses, that if you know of anything, any of the code being violated, inform the authorities. That is what's called whistleblowing. And actually, whistleblowing is now considered mainly essential in the uh, in the field of auditing, where private auditing companies audit the financial uh, data of organizations for securities exchange. And if you find something that cannot be explained and which seems to be illegal and irregular, then it is your duty for that audit company to inform the securities exchange that there is something not quite right here. So similarly in engineering, you find that somebody is doing the wrong thing, somebody is taking bribes, somebody is cutting down on the right material and putting less than the correct material or sub-quality, substandard material, you inform the relevant parties to take corrective action. Because if you don't, you can end up with a major threat to the public. You don't take part in any action that will cause a waste of public funds. You know, as like I said, you are entrusted with the funds of the government, of the donor, and you have to use those properly and not waste the money on unnecessary things or be dishonest about how you disperse the money. And if there is, and if you need to solve a problem, always try to have a dialogue with the community. You know, sometimes especially when you're doing a project in a rural area, uh, the the people there might object. If you try to cut a road, they might say this is not the way. This has been our land for so many years. Have a dialogue. Try to convince them, and you have to show that what you are going to do is for their benefit. If it is going to be detrimental to them and only in the interest of some politician in the area, well, they're not going to make. So you must be honest and convince them. Have a dialogue that what you're going to do is we're applying this technology, we're going to build this road, we're going to build this water supply scheme for your benefit, not for somebody else's. So this is what whistleblowing is. You can read this, this thing, but Securities Exchange have I've asked the chartered accountants to now take this in as one of the regular feature, and it's becoming a legitimate action to informed if there is anything illegal being done. So that is clause 1. Now let's see what clause 2 says. Engineers shall act in such a manner as to uphold and enhance the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession, while safeguarding public interest at all times. Because you have to always look after the public. So basically, you do not involve yourself in any business or professional practice which you know will be fraudulent or dishonest in nature. You do not use association with other persons, corporations, or partnerships to conceal unethical acts. You see, you do something wrong, you can go and because you have a contact with some junior minister or somebody who can exert a little pressure. You go and tell him like, please, speak to the chairman and hide this thing, or don't bring it up in the open. We will some of the time solve it. That is not correct. You don't continue any partnership with a or active professional matters with an engineer who has been removed from the membership of the ISL because of improper conduct. Now, example here would be like if you are a colleague of yours, you have a firm, engineering construction company called, okay, you call it what? Pereira and Fernando contractors, chartered engineers. Now, Pereira and Fernando contractors, under that it would be the big letters, chartered engineers, not fine. Now, if Mr. Fernando has some problem in violating the code of ethics and his name is taken off the roll for some dishonest act, then you cannot say that your firm is Fernando and Pereira and Fernando. So basically, you have to then close the company down. Because you can't say that you are Pereira and Fernando chartered engineers because Fernando is no longer a chartered engineer. So you have to then change the name of the company. And if you are lucky enough to have sons who are engineers and who have got their charter, then you can call it Pereira and Sons, chartered engineers, not bakers. So basically, you don't carry on an association with somebody who has been removed from the role of the ISL due to any dishonest act. When you are hiring engineers, when you are recruiting people, you go on the basis of merit. This does not happen very often because, especially in the state sector, you'll find that quite often you get a list of people from the minister or somebody down the line saying, take these people. Some of them are useless. But if you're recruiting, say, about 20 people, if you can afford to take 2 or 3 people who are passengers. But if you have to recruit 1 or 2 people, then you must take the best because the organization will suffer if you take dead wood. You can't deliver and can't do a job properly. And when you recruit people, make sure that they are adequately paid for. They are the adequate, appropriate remuneration for their professional engineering, in keeping with their qualification and the current market rates. So basically, you uphold the honor of the profession and you ensure that you look after your people when you recruit them. You go on the basis of merit. It's a meritocracy, not a area which is what we call it where it's called family nepotism and family ties. There was a very interesting video clip that came on some very senior member of the Singaporean government who had been there from the beginning. I think he was Sri Lankan, and now they talking of how Lee Kuan Yew went on the basis of choosing people for his cabinet on meritocracy, on merit. best people were chosen. You couldn't care less whether they whatever, whether they were Indian or Malay or Chinese or but the best people with the best capabilities were chosen by him to make form his cabinets. And that is why Singapore developed. Unfortunately, we can't say the same about our country, regrettably. Okay, clause 3 talks about sustainability. Engineers shall be committed to meet the sustainable management of the planet's resources. And you have to minimize adverse environmental impacts to your engineering works. Right? Okay. So to achieve this, you have to evaluate environmental impacts and adverse environmental impacts and take remedial measures. Now, you know that before any big project is launched, the client has to do a environmental impact assessment, a EIA, which will point out the, the pros and cons of the project and highlight the adverse areas, adverse to the environment and also to the society there, right? The social community there. Now, unfortunately, again, we find that some of our big projects done here in the recent past, these are fudged, very bluntly, right? These are, and I mean, there are always issues regarding the port city as to the environment. The Umawe, another classic case of where there was the EIA was done after the project had been started and they started doing it also. Then just to show that there was something, they got a EIA prepared by the state university. So you can't be dishonest when you do this thing. You have to be absolutely correct and do this properly if you want to protect the environment. Then also as engineers, you should be aware of the various rules and regulations and laws pertaining to environmental protection, especially with regards to the application of your engineering knowledge and technology. I don't expect you to know exactly the word by word the law, but you should know there is a particular clause or a particular rule like this and know where to look for it and how to get it. There will be specialists who can guide you on this. You tell the environmental specialist in your project team, he will find it, or he or she will find it. But you should know that there is such a thing, right? Then, I mean, like all these projects nowadays, and nothing is totally engineering. Any big engineering projects involve a whole team of people. There are the engineers. The engineers themselves will be broken down into the geotechnical specialists, the civil engineers, the electrical engineers, the chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, water supply specialists, and then there will be the environmentalists. There will be this sociologist. There will be the financial people who. So there are a whole cluster of specialists involved in a project, and you have to work. You can't say that I'm the catch whisker, I'm the engineer, I know more than anyone else. You all have to contribute by working towards achieving the best outcome for the project. Sometimes you have to look at how new technologies can affect the environment. There may be new, for example, like even in Mao, the tunnel boring was something that was used for the first time, and I think they did really do a proper analysis to find out what could happen. So you have to be aware of all the pitfalls of new technology that could happen in carrying out the job. Then you should also try to reuse material, minimize the waste. You minimize, reuse the waste, and whatever you can't reuse, ensure a safe disposal not by just going and dumping it into some plot of land by the side of the road, but sure that it's properly safe disposed of. Sri Lanka, we are still not, we still have a fair way to go. And at the moment, still the electrical, like bulbs and light fitting, fluorescent lamps, CFL lamps, batteries, there's no proper disposal method for these. And these, if they're put into the landfill, will contaminate the earth, contaminate the surrounding lands. And conservation. Yeah, conservation is something that we should all practice, even starting with a simple thing like knocking off the light when you leave the room, knocking off your air conditioner, saving on water, close the tap when you're not using it. So make sure that you conserve because the resources are very limited. As somebody said, the next world war will be not for land or oil, it will be for water. So we are running out of water, good, potable, safe water. So you have to be very, very conscious of conserving the natural resources. And now the fourth clause, engineers shall build their reputation on merit and not compete unfairly. So that is, you work on your own achievements. You achieve your acceptance by the people, by the public, by your organization on your own achievements. So it does not mean that you don't pay, offer directly or indirectly inducements, including political contributions. So you can even, I don't know whether as engineers you can afford to make political contributions. Companies do that. Companies do make big donations to various political parties, especially before elections, when they support everybody because you never know who will come in. Of course, if they are fairly sure that party A will most probably win, they will give him maybe 60% and split the balance among both the other parties, just in case one of them were to come in. But even as an engineer, there are people like case where one of the people he was not an engineer, fortunately. He was just in the executive in the management side, and he was a smart guy. He got to know when his bosses, the director's wife's birthday was, when their anniversary was, and he would send a bouquet of flowers, a cake, a gift to that lady. And that lady, naturally, she was so thrilled. She used to tell her husband, get this sort of promotion. And a lot of this used to be done just before this, when the annual valuation and assessment comes around. So, but that is the type of, cheap uh, activities that people can resort to is also bribery, indirect bribery to benefit for themselves. You don't undercut another engineer. For example, two or three of you are competing for a job, one of your colleagues gets a job, and then you start spreading all sorts, you weren't undercutting. You say you got past stories that, this fellow he supported the other party earlier. He's not in favor of the present government. He's a guy who was always critical of the chairman, things like that. And then finally that person, if the management is so dumb as to believe you, they will then remove that poor man and appoint you as and you don't have half the capabilities that person has. You don't falsify or misrepresent your qualifications or your associate's qualifications, experience and prior responsibility. So don't misrepresent your career path, what you have been doing, right? Your qualifications and your experience. Don't resort to malicious thought. This is, as I said earlier, this Kalapatra business is a very popular thing with us, and now with the social media, with Facebook and Twitter and all these horrible things that are there, it's very easy to malign the character or the of a person, which can cause a lot of unwanted damage to his life and his career. Remember that this will always come back to you one day. So be careful when you do this type of thing. Don't use your connection that because your father knows the chairman or your uncle is a manager, is a parliamentarian or something. Don't use connections to get a position and compete unfairly with with other engineers, with your colleagues. Right? When you are explaining your own work, be modest. Don't go and boast about things. And don't unnecessarily criticize others, people's work. Be modest in what you do. Because one thing good I see is that engineers won't put their names up on the when there's a building coming up, there's nothing but, and engineers are basically not known by their name. Now, as you know, people know architects. They will say the parliament was done by Bawa, that house was done by Anjali, and then somebody else, Edward, or read, or Edward Reed and Beck design that lovely building, right? Engineers who do all the hard work, all the structural work, the geotechnical work, they are only the people look at the beauty, the external appearance. The value of the engineer's work is not appreciated. But that's okay. You're doing a good job. The bridge that you already designed as a team, because the engineers work as a team, right? So you be modest about that's okay. People, the community will appreciate it. The village that is benefiting by the road you're building, the water supply, they will be thankful to you. Because you're not a politician. Maybe if you want to get your politics later on, you can use that. Say that I'm the one who designed the bridge. Anyhow, yeah. You can always acknowledge, give credit for work that has been done by your subordinates and by other people. Don't try to take all the credit for yourself. I mean, this again, an example or a little anecdote is that I once saw some major bridge opening in the country, and the I think the prime minister or no, that time Rajapaksa was president, he came. And then the senior engineer who had a whole team of engineers working on him. He is the one who went to the front and was hanging around, walking behind him. And he never called his team, introduced them, and he was always talking of my did this, I did that, I did that. And the poor team who did all the work, yeah, right, were in the back room somewhere, with no acknowledgement. Now that is not right. That's not correct. And you don't do things like that. That's a cheap way of gaining popularity and trying to climb up the ladder. Don't resort to plagiarism, right? You know what plagiarism is? Copying somebody else's work and not acknowledging it. If you're taking something, you got to acknowledge it. You got to get permission. And especially in a lot of the, when you're writing your reports, your project reports, you can, I mean, obviously a lot of the work has been done, there have been designs done by others. You can quote those, but you got to acknowledge that this is taken from these people. And some cases you may have to get their permission even before you use it, because under the intellectual rights, permission of the author or the originator is required. And this is not only even in technical, even in music, in drama. Some time ago, the one of the local production companies was trying to do Cats. They were doing this. Andrew Lloyd Webber's. They had done one or two, and then they Cats, not Cats. They were Phantom of the Opera, and they had started practices, and they were getting ready, getting the set ready, and then they suddenly got a letter from the lawyers of these people. They had been advised, they'd been told that, informed that somebody in Sri Lanka is trying to do this without proper permission. And they were threatened with legal action, and that would have been running in thousands of pounds sterling, which they wouldn't have been able to pay if they proceeded. So they had to quickly stop it, and then they had to go through the whole process of applying for permission to do it, and then they finally got it, and then went ahead maybe 2 or 3 years later and did the production. So you can't get away with this nowadays. There are so many safeguards which you have to follow and to do things honestly and correctly. Similarly, if you are using anything, intellectual property rights require that you acknowledge the work of other people. So you will give your right to know anything like that. and you don't go charging extremely high rates or extremely low rates. As we said earlier, be honest in when you prepare quotation. I think that was a high triple E requirement. Be honest in preparing your quotation. Don't go too high, don't go too low. So plagiarism, I won't go into this because you can look it up. I'm sure you must be knowing what plagiarism is. It is literally theft, bottom line. Plagiarism is act of fraud. It involves stealing somebody else's work and lying about it. You can use somebody else's work and acknowledge it. But if you take somebody else's work and you don't acknowledge it, you lie about it saying that it is your work, then that is actually it's a criminal act for which you can be prosecuted. So clause 5 of the IESL Code of Ethics says that engineers shall perform professional services only in the areas of their competence. That we have all seen that earlier, that you only work in areas that you are capable, you are competent of. Like I said, if you are a specialist structural designer, but you can only do 12 floors, you go up to 12 floors. You don't go beyond that because that's not your area. If you are certified to design a 40-story block, yeah, then you do it. And you do not sign any plans or documents for which you don't have the competence to sign or which has not been prepared under your control. So you don't you do not sign because sometimes somebody might come and ask you, can you sign this set of plans? Well, it has been drawn by somebody else. Unless you check it out and make sure and you know what is in it, right? Other you might be signing something that is ethically not correct. It's signing it is not correct, and it is something that can be detrimental to the welfare of the people. So clause 6 says that you shall apply your skills and knowledge in the interest of an employee or client to whom they shall act as professional matters. So basically, you have to be loyal to your boss. If he's paying you your salary, providing you the bread and butter, you be loyal to him, right? You don't want to work for somebody, you take his money and go and work for somebody else. So it follows that at all times, you have to avoid a conflict of interest. And you keep your employees updated on any matters, including financial interest, which could lead to a conflict of interest. Now here, right, if you are, for example, an engineer in the road in the RDA, and a particular contract is given where RDA will provide all the design for the highway, but the contractor is doing the bridges on the design and build. Now the contractor might approach you knowing that you are an employer in the RDA or and tell you, look, can you do this design for me? Because you knowing very well that because you are in the RDA, your colleague who is a design engineer in the RDA who's checking it will be favorable in his judgment. Now that is a conflict of interest because you are representing the client. You're working for the client. Even we are not more directly involved in this particular project, you are working with the client and you should not undertake that because knowing very well that that man has come to you because he knows that you will tell your buddy who is the design engineer who is checking this to be you pass the drawing, pass the design, even if there are flaws in it. So you don't undertake anything that will create a conflict of interest. You have to maintain neutrality because if you are, like I said earlier, if you are the internet connection is unstable. If you are uh, sort of engineer of a large project, then you are like the person which are represent the client's interest, but you also representing the you also deal with the contractor. And the contractor's claims, if, like I said, if he's claiming for more time what he really is entitled to, then you have to be neutral, you have to be partial, and give him what he is really entitled to get. Just because I represent the client, you can't say, no, I'm not going to pay you anything. You have to be, I'm not, you should have done the work with rain or no rain. No way. That's not correct. You have to be fair and be, you're like the umpire, you're the referee in this matter. So you have to be fair by both parties, the client and the contract. You don't accept gratuity. You don't get any, gifts from people for doing things. Contractors will try to offer you, to pass badly done work, to substandard material, incorrect measurements of material. For example, if you're getting a lorry, a truckload of sand, which is say 3 cubic meters, uh, you have to make sure that there is 3 cubic meters and there's not a barrel or something stuck a couple of barrels under the pile so that you will only get end up with 2.5 or 2 cubic meters. So you have to make sure that, and you don't accept any uh, kickbacks from contractors or anyone to pass illegitimate and wrong bills. You don't accept free engineering design, any consideration, including free engineering designs from material equipment suppliers. Now, this is something that happens, especially now, of course, when building services are just starting up. And a lot of the big engineering companies, contracting companies, they were specialists in civil engineering and mechanical and electrical engineering, but they didn't have much knowledge of, say, for example, air conditioning, HVAC, or fire protection. So quite often they look to specialists in those areas to give them a design. And then when you do it that way, you have to call for tender, invite them to come and tender for doing the air conditioning design for this multi-story building, or doing the fire protection system for that building, and you award the contract. But sometimes there might be some contractor who will come and say, look, I will give you a complete design free of charge for for the HVAC installation. All you need to do is the specifications there, the BOQ is there. All you do is just put it into your tender documents, and everything is okay. And then I will also look after you. Maybe or you can have a trip to the supplier, the suppliers of head office in Singapore or in Germany or whatever it is. Because then when you do that, you are being unfair. You are not being loyal to your owner, to your client. Because the moment you put that person's design in, nobody else can bid competitively against that bid. Because that bid is tailor-made, that person's specifications and is tailor-made for his equipment. And his equipment may not be the best equipment, it may not be energy efficient. It may be more costly than somebody else's. But you are blocking any other avenue of competition by accepting his offer and his design. So you don't accept any free design given or material or any equipment given by any contractor when you're involved in a large project or any project. Again, you don't solicit or accept gratuities or directly or indirectly from contractor. And this bribery is not only money, it is also free trips abroad. Sometimes they not only for you, but for you and your, depending on how big the contract, the value is, or you and your family, or you and your wife, and with a lot of spending money for her to go and buy all the stuff she likes. Right? So you have to be very, very careful and guard against this type of bribery, which is very tempting, and it needs a lot of strength on your part to stand up against that. You don't accept commissions, fees, rewards, or other benefits from a third party while advising a client. Yeah, so if you're working for a client, you're working for your employer, and you don't get any rewards or money from somebody else, mainly because they want you to pass on information that you might be privy to uh, while working for that particular organization of clients. Right? Then, like we said earlier, if you find that there is something that is not in the interest of the public or the welfare of the public, you must then tell your client that this is not the best, the project is not viable, and we need to find another option. Confidentiality. This is another area that people will try to bribe you and get you to give out confidential information regarding the work you're doing. Now, especially when you are preparing a big tender, a bid, somebody or another competitor can try to find out what are you going to quote, and they can try to bribe you into giving them the information. So you maintain the confidentiality of your client because you are a senior man, you are the senior manager, you are trusted with this as the senior manager or the senior engineer, and your client has placed his trust in you. You have to reciprocate by being faithful and honest in your dealing for him. Again, you don't sign or seal plans unless you know what is exactly in it and that these are really done proper engineering standards. So 7 says that if you have to say something, be truthful. This was there in the first clause as well. Again, it's echoed here to a great extent. And if you have to give evidence or you have to make a statement, for God's sake, be precise and knowledgeable. Don't go unprepared. And if you are being, offered, if there's any pecuniary, that is somebody said offer you some money or something to change your judgment, especially don't do that because especially this thing can happen when you evidence in a court of law at a court investigation or at an inquiry. And if you go and change your your tone and what you're saying, you can get into a lot of trouble because and if it is a legal case, you can end up by being charged for perjury. That is telling lies to the courts, which can carry a jail sentence. So for God's sake, don't go and make statements which are dishonest. And the final clause, which is one of the most important clauses, is that engineers shall continue their professional development and actively assist their engineers, their subordinates to advance their knowledge and experience. So basically, means that you have to develop your knowledge, lifelong learning of you and your subordinates is a must. And here there's a bit of, you know, the IESL is doing a bit of canvassing for saying that you must also get your people to support the institution. And after all, the institution is only engineering institution in Sri Lanka. So it's perfectly fair for you to tell your subordinates, please support the institution of engineers, get involved in the student section activities, in the sectional committee, the mechanical, the electrical, the civil, chemical, the sectional committee, and contribute and learn because there's a lot that you can do by getting involved. There's very good networking. You can make good contacts. You can, really develop and build up the knowledge, engineering knowledge by talking to seniors, So it's something that you should do, encourage people to get involved with the institution and work with the institution. So that completes the ISL Code of Ethics. And what we have in summary, if you look at it, the clause 1 is primarily to be concerned about people. The second one is to uphold the honor of the profession. So the first one is about people. The second one is about the profession. The third one is about ensuring that you practice environmental sustainability. Fourth one is to develop your reputation through your own achievements. Fifth one is practice only in areas of specialization. Be loyal to your employees. That's 6. Be truthful in reporting. That's 7. And be involved in lifelong learning for final one. So basically what is important here, the clause deals with people, the profession, environment, your own achievements, specialization, loyalty, truthfulness, and lifelong learning. This is continuing professional development. Okay, so that is the ISL Code of Ethics. And I'll leave you to go to this because we're running out of time. We go through this and you see what ethics is all about. This is about Calvin and Hobbes. It's a little boy who has a toy tie. Actually, he has a tiger doll, a small doll, but he imagines that the doll and the tiger doll is his sort of companion, and they go get into a lot of interesting discussions. Professional conduct. This is important, but what I'm going to say is here that every corporate member whose name appears on the register is the charter of charter engineer is entitled to describe himself as a charter engineer and all that type of thing. Last one is important. Now, corporate members in the partnership of a person who is not a corporate member themselves shall not use after the title of such a firm the designated charter engineer. That's what I told you the case of Perra and Fernando and ending up with Perra and Sons. Okay. No person who has ceased to be on the roll shall make use of any designation. So you can't, once you're removed from the role, you can't call yourself a chartered engineer. Bottom line. All members are required to order their conduct so as to uphold the dignity, standing, and reputation of the institution. So when all that you do must be in the interest of the institution, and you cannot do anything that will damage the reputation or the standing or the good reputation that the institution has. And then this is that all these things are listed in the code of ethics. Now, if you have to answer the question of how important are ethics in today's society, you can see how ethical everybody is. One guy is writing, and all the others are sitting and copying, peeping over his shoulder, see, and that's very ethical, is it? What do you think? How ethical is their behavior? Okay, I'll come down. This is the last bit, disciplinary procedures. Because like I said, there's no point having a code of ethics if you cannot have some way of enforcing it and having a set of disciplinary procedures that will ensure that the engineers act correctly and that if they go astray, they can be brought back onto the correct path again. So what is, I will very briefly, if I read through these things in detail later on, when you go back, I think this is all on the web, so it's there. Any member against whom an allegation of misconduct is made in writing by an individual shall be informed. So if you find one of somebody, another engineer has done something wrong, you can write to the Institute of Engineers. It must be writing, no verbal thing, right? To write to the institution saying that so and so has done something wrong, and he will be in turn written to by the president of the ISL, saying that there has been an allegation made against you, and you are given a time period in 2 weeks to respond. When he responds, then you shall, in consultation with the president-elect, decide whether whether that person has vindicated himself, whether he has what he's saying is okay, he has been unfairly accused. If the member is unable to vindicate himself, then the case is referred to what's called a disciplinary committee, who will investigate and report to the council. Now, going back a little, at the first council meeting, that is after the AGM of the ISL, the council appoints 6 fellows to form a disciplinary committee. Now, from those 6, any 3 may be chosen to a disciplinary panel. Sorry, from those 6, any 3 may be chosen to form a disciplinary committee to inquire into a particular case. and the disciplinary committee will be appointed by the council. So there are six names, and they will, appoint over right? You will form the panel, the committee, and they will also give you the terms of reference and basically the framework, and the chairperson, who generally a past president, will be appointed will be nominated by the council. Now, the member who is against whom the allegation has been made will be notified in writing by the executive secretary that charges have been formulated against him, and the names of the disciplinary panel are given, and he's again asked to respond in writing to the charges made. Right? Now, the interesting thing here is, you may ask, why are the names of the members of the disciplinary committee sent to him? He has the right to object or to reject anyone if he feels that that person may be prejudiced against. Now, for example, like he may have been working in a company where this person was a senior engineer, this guy may have been a relatively junior engineer, and he did something or which upset that person. And subsequently this man left that company and went somewhere, or that person retired and went away. And this person against whom the accusation might feel that that particular engineer might remember when his name comes up that this is the person against whom with whom I had this problem, and maybe prejudiced against him. That's from on the professional side. It can also be that this person may have been, having an interest in one of the engineer's daughter, and that didn't work out, and he might feel that particular senior engineer might have a prejudice against him because he didn't get married to his daughter. So there are various things, but if you feel that there is that particular engineer may be prejudiced, you can ask for that person to be removed from the panel, on the committee. Now, he can do it once, maybe he can do it twice, because there are only 6 people there. So he may be for the third time, maybe have a totally new disciplinary committee, and after that he has to live with what is there. He can't. If at all, they might change once, but so far as far as I'm aware, there has been no change in the panel that has been nominated. Then, of course, we go to, and there's a date and time fixed for all this, all the evidence is collected, and the panel, the disciplinary committee will first review all the evidence, and then they will call ISL will come, who will make this. ISL is generally represented by the executive secretary, and also this person will be, and he can come and also present his case. Now, just going back now, if you are to object, you must have very good reasons why you are objecting to why you feel somebody might be prejudiced. You can't just say, I don't want him because I don't like his face. I don't want him because he is prejudiced, and he may be prejudiced because of this particular incident that happened maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago already. Now, the person who is being found fault with, he can't bring a lawyer, but he can get a corporate member of the institution to represent him or to defend him, or he might decide to conduct his own defense. It's up to him. And then the disciplinary committee must try to complete this as early as possible, say within a month. If the person who is accused does not turn up for the hearing, he is warned. And if he does not come a second time, the disciplinary committee, the hearing will be held ex parte. Ex parte means that in his absence. And then he's at a disadvantage because he doesn't really know what the thinking, he can't gauge the thinking of the people, and he can't be there to defend himself. So it becomes a one-sided court. So basically, we go through this whole disciplinary procedure. And the disciplinary committee has to make a recommendation to what punishment or what action should be taken. The worst can be to be expelled from the ISL or taken off from the ISL role of this. You can be sacked from the ISL, or you can be removed from the role of chartered engineers or whatever it is. But to do that, you have to have a majority decision of the council at which at least two-thirds of the members of the council is present. Now we have about 35 or 36 members in the council, so at least 24 of them must be there. Nowadays, generally all are there, most of the time. And then at least two-thirds of those present must decide that this person must be. The punishments can go to like asking to make an apology or you know uh, stopping his charter for a short time or whatever it is, depending on how serious the offense is. And whatever the decision taken by the committee and the council, the person who is accused can make an appeal, which is heard within 1 month of being told that you have been found guilty and this is going to be the punishment. He can appeal, uh, and of course, again, if they go through it and find that there's still original decision stands, well, that's that. Now, one way area where you have to be very careful. You see, all of you are trying for your charter. And once you have completed all the requirements for the charter, your academic requirement of course there, your A paper, your B paper, your design, you done your interview, and at the interview you pass your A paper also, and then they will circulate the names of all those who are eligible to become chartered engineers to the other chartered, those who are already chartered. And that is the point where somebody can object. There's one example here when this happened when I was the secretary. We circulated the name, and there was a particular academic who wrote back and said, "This person is dishonest and he, uh, he acted very dishonestly when I employed." What happened was that really this academic was doing a research project somewhere in the North Central province or whatever it is, and he needed measurements of level of the tank levels taken every week or something similar to that. So this young engineer who had done his finals and was working as an instructor was sent to go around every month. He had to go around the, uh, the tanks in the NCP and get the information. And actually, the farmers are supposed to record these levels every week. But he is not practical for him to go every week. So once a month, he's going to collect all the information. They will give us forms, they were taught how to do it. Everything was fine. And they will be paid. So everything went okay. He got all the information, came and gave it to his boss. And then the boss started writing his report and analyzing the figures. By the time this fellow finishes term as an instructor and then got a job when was about when went off. Then so the boss, the academic thought might be fine, everything the project has worked out well. He decided to go around and meet the farmers and thank them for their cooperativeness and all that. He went and he went and thanked them and said, "Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy that you have been really observant. I mean, I hope uh, the money I was paying. I paid you I think 1,000 rupees per month for each service. I hope that was valid." They said, "Sir, we never got 1,000 rupees. We only got 500 rupees." And then when he started digging, he found that his instructor had pocketed 500 and paid this fellow 500. And so they were quite happy with the 500 rupees, but when they realized that they could have got another 500 more, they were really upset. And that is the time he launched this, when this person's name came up, maybe 4 or 5 years later for the charter, he sent this objection. And then we had an inquiry. This person denied, or then by the time the academic had got all the evidence information, and when the engineer was confronted with this, actually he cried and he admitted that he had done all this. And the reason was he wanted to buy a motorcycle because he wanted to go and visit his fiance who was so many miles away. So he needed the motorcycle. And it was, it now sounds hilarious, but it was really a human problem. So really it was something that is fraud and dishonesty, and we could have been very harsh and actually suspended him from the ISL. But we felt, I mean, what if it is a young man's career on the rocks? So we said, okay, we will withhold your charter for 2 years. 1 year, 2 years, I think. And after that, we will evolve. So basically, he lost a seniority in the government service, but he got his charter and he went on to. And then after that, he settled down and he was very honest about what he did. He knew that he couldn't get away with it. Okay, so that completes our chat on the tedious chat on the ISL Code of Ethics. I hope you have got reasonable background and understanding what is involved. Please don't hesitate to contact me or get in touch with me if you need any clarification. I wish you good luck at the exam. I think that maybe the paper exam might be I don't know, maybe sometime in March. So you got to do well and pass it, and I will definitely before the out. And that's the one of the biggest hurdles you have to face in your journey to becoming a chartered engineer. Okay, so good luck to all of you. So as I say, ethics, it says this is what you do, the right way to go, the wrong way, what you shouldn't do. But I think quite often what happens, people go with it depends. So depending on how convenient it is, you take that route rather than doing that route or that route. Okay, gentlemen, good night to all of you. And please don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you need any help or any guidance or any clarification. Try to find the chat, I can't get chat.